Welcome to Gurukul Lessons on Early Indian History. Friends, we have already dealt with archaeological sources for early Indian state. Last time we were talking about material remains. Today we are going to take up the topic of epigraphs and inscriptions. So, what is epigraphy? The study of inscriptions is called epigraphy. It is a principal tool of archaeology when we are dealing with literate societies. Today, it has emerged as a discipline in its own right. But the fundamental question, what is an inscription? An inscription is any writing that is engraved on something. It can be stone, wood, metal, ivory plate, bronze statue, brick, clay, shells, pottery, anything. Epigraphy includes not just deciphering the text of the inscriptions, but also analyzing its content. So, while still on epigraphy, we have to understand what is palleolography. It is actually the study, a scientific study of ancient writing. Many a times, inscriptions are already dated in the sense the regnal year of the ruler is there, but there are many times that we get no date on it. In that case, palleography is made use of, and then we start getting a date for it either through the lettering or through the alphabets. And who is then an epigraphist? He is a person or she is a person who uses the method of epigraphy in order to reconstruct the past. They are people who are responsible for reconstruction, translating, dating an inscription, and finding other material, relevant material in that. Finally, it is a historian who interprets the document, which we call an inscription. But many a times, epigraphy and history are dealt by the same individual. Let me give you an example. A very well-known epigraphist was D.C. Sarkar, very well-known. In fact, we are indebted to the kind of volumes that he had brought on inscriptions. Along with that, Mahadevan was yet another person. We have Fleet, we have many other scholars that we can think of. While on this topic on inscriptions, we need to understand what is the material that is used for engraving something. When we look at the inscriptions, especially from the time of Harappa, which incidentally are undeciphered so far, we see that most of the material is on statite seals. The deciphered ones were recorded on the stone, sometimes on the temple walls also. In early centuries of the Common Era, copper plate also started being used for it, but even then, work on stone carried on, especially in context of South India. As I just mentioned, the temple walls had huge land grant inscriptions on it, and the purpose is very, very evident. The purpose was to maintain them as permanent records. You would be wondering what is generally the time frame for any epigraph to be written. The oldest undeciphered inscriptions, as I mentioned, go back to Harappa, but the deciphered ones can be placed to late 4th century BC or better still early 3rd century BCE, and these are written in Brahmi and Kharoshti and ascribed to Mauryan Emperor Ashoka. These are in different languages and definitely in different scripts also, but most of them, the language used is Prakrit, Magadhi Prakrit, in fact, variants of that language, and the script is that of Brahmi. Now, you would wonder that why am I talking about inscriptions coming only around the Mauryan time when we all are aware of the fact that we have a rich Vedic corpus which dates at least back to the 1500 BCE to 500 BCE. Friends, even when that period is very, very rich in oral tradition, we do not get any direct mention of writing, nor have we got any material so far that can be ascribed to that age which has something written on it. But historians wonder whether the practice of writing had come up by then or not, especially because very complex arithmetical calculations do appear in later Vedic corpus, and this might have required some form of writing. What we can think about is that possibly that these were written on some material which was not enduring enough, some leaf which may have got decomposed over time. What are the advantages of inscriptions as a source of history? Now, inscriptions have the advantage of durability. Anything that is inscribed stays for years and years. But more important than that, friends, they are concurrent to the events that they talk about. Information therein can be connected easily to a time and a space, and this we can say especially if we compare it to a manuscript. Change and additions, if those are made, what we refer to as spurious elements that come in, can be detected without much difficulty. Text of the inscription may be brief, yes, but a large number of these short inscriptions can provide vital, important information on history to us. And they are especially relevant when it comes to there being corroborative sources. What do I mean by corroborative source? What I mean is that if there is an information that we get from one source, if it gets cross-verified by the other source, then we are very sure that an event has taken place. Let me give you an instance. The Ayodhya inscription of Dhandev corroborated Patanjali's reference that Pushyamitra Shunga held the Ashwamedh sacrifice. So when we are getting this information from two sources, one is coming from literature, the other is coming from epigraph, we can say with a degree of certainty that this actually happened. So they become very, very important to us when we are trying to recreate political history of a time. It may be worthwhile, friends, to compare inscriptions with literary sources. Of course, the commonality is we are very, very clear that we are talking of literate societies. But when we look at a literature, when we look at those literary texts or sources, we find that they are written from primarily a theoretical perspective. To give you an example, in the post-Vedic period, we have the Dharma Sutras, we have the Griha Sutras, we also have the six schools of philosophy. They are very speculative, they postulate on a number of issues, and they, of course, are great in length. Compared to that, the inscription reflects exactly what had happened at that time. What I'm talking about is the practical application. Ideas may be floating around. Were they actually put into action or not? That gets corroborated by the epigraph. And of course, as I mentioned, if there are annotations, we can easily cite them. Now, the character of the writing and the subject of epigraphy and literature at times are different. For examples, if you're looking at epigraphs, these are texts inscribed in stone which are usually for a public view. Now, that may not be the case when it comes to literature. When we're talking about literature per se, then we are looking at a particular kind of an audience, a literate audience, and something what we refer to as personalized reading. Now, the geographical spread of a king's inscription is often taken as indication of the area under his control. Ashoka's inscription can be a case in point in this. We get to know the humongous area that he brought under his control only by not just reading the content of the inscription, but where these are placed. Now, this kind of advantage we will not have when we are looking at literature, because when was the first idea came up? When did it come up? When did it get annotated? How did it get diffused? What is its area of influence? All these are things that we can never be sure by simple reading of literature. Now, literature does give us an idea when lipi or writing came into being. Now, the first definite literary reference to writing and written documents occur in the Buddhist Pali text, Vinaya Pitak to start with, which is around 6th century BC onwards, post-Vedic period as we call them, and the Jatakas, which were there in around the 3rd century BCE. Panini's Ashtadhyayi also refers to the word lipi and talks about lipis. So we are sure that people knew about the art of writing definitely by the 4th century BCE. The Brahmi of Ashokan inscription appears to be a fairly developed script. It must have had a prior history of its evolution much before we see it in engraved. So if it came up, say, around the 3rd century BCE, we are sure that earlier in the 4th century they already were aware about it. There has recently been an example, or at least it's touted as an example, that the earliest reference of Brahmi script comes from Anuradhapur. Anuradhapur is a place in Sri Lanka, and during excavation, some potsherds were unearthed with short inscriptions that probably had the name of some individual that looked like the Brahmi script. These can be dated easily to early part of the 4th century BCE. But friends, let us remember that it's still a disputable thing. We are not very, very sure about it. Yes, but the idea that some form of writing or practice of writing was coming up as early as 4th century BC in Sri Lanka is quite plausible. Let's also look at the kind of scripts that we have and how did scripts really evolve now that we are studying epigraphy. There are 3 main kinds of scripts. The logographic script first, which is written in symbols. Symbols stand for some word. The syllabic script, where there is a syllabi which is like half vowel, and then the alphabetic script where single phonetic sounds single letter stands for a phonetic sound. Now, alphabets are distinct in the sense that they have both vowels and consonants. So, both the 2 scripts that we are talking about, Brahmi and Kharoshthi, the earliest of the scripts that we have been able to discover, stand midway between the alphabetic and syllabic scripts, so they can be described as semi-syllabic or semi-alphabetic. We have had variety of scripts and languages in our ancient Indian period. Brahmi, Kharoshthi, Siddhamatrika, Gaudi, and so are the scripts that we are talking about. And in fact, one of the postmodern Buddhist text, Lalit Vistar, gives us an idea of as many as 64 scripts in circulation around this time. Similarly, when we talk about languages, these vary from the variants of Prakrit to Sanskrit, Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, Bengali, Gujarati, and so on. Study of epigraphs in different language and scripts goes hand in hand with the study of where they are geographically located. Actually, it also goes along with what we refer to as the study of regionalism. Now, friends, coming back to the oldest of the scripts, and that is the Harappan script. Harappan script is a corpus of symbols. These are extremely short. Epigraphists wonder if these were used to record some sort of language messages or had just some symbolic value. Now, in spite of many attempts made, the script we know has not been deciphered so far. We know of Vasco Parpola writing a book on it and other scholars also at it, but it has not been discovered so far. We have not even known any bilingual inscription. If that were there and one script had been understood, then it would have been easier to understand even the Harappan script. Moreover, within the Harappan script, we do not see significant changes over time. By and large, we call it logographic, which is based on pictograms. Friends, if we were to compare the Harappan script with the scripts around in the contemporary world, the Mesopotamia, that is in Mesopotamia, Egypt, or in China, we found that Harappans did not use script that often. This is not to suggest that they were not an evolved civilization. We know how evolved they were. A fantastic drainage system, the town planning that they had. But what I'm trying to suggest here is the possibility that they did not use script as a form of communication on a very large scale. They did use it, but possibly not on a very large scale. Now look at this picture. This is a picture of a Harappan script, and you can see that what it is, they're just like symbols. You can see figures which are akin to human being, where they are the chakras or fish or a V-shaped, symbol. And it seems to have been a little static and not evolved. This is a picture of what we call the Dholavira signboard. Now, we call it a signboard. Dholavira, all of you are familiar with the fact that it's one of the most impressive site on the Indian side of the subcontinent. And this particular inscription is called signboard because it runs into at least 20 letters. It may be conveying an idea of entry into the city. There can be a sense of it, but even when we are not very sure about it, what we can say with certitude is that it did indicate something impressive. And also the fact that possibly at this point in time, many more people were becoming literate. Now, if we look at inscriptions beyond the Harappa, we can actually divide them into two sections. We can call, especially in the modern and the post-modern time, the official inscriptions, which will include the edicts of Ashok, Prashasti of Samudragupta, the commemorative inscriptions, land grant inscriptions, and so on. And then the next is the private inscriptions, which include the Jogimara graffiti inscription. And in the postmodern time, we also have the Ayagapattas, the Pratima lakes, the votive inscriptions. Let me first start with the private inscriptions because the official inscriptions have to be described in some detail. Now, if you look at this picture, this is a picture of an epigraph at Jogimara Caves, Chhattisgarh, which is an example of a private inscription. Let us also take a look at what does it really talk about. Now, if we were to translate it, and this is a translation that I am showing you, which has been done by T. Block, it talks about Sutanuka. There is somebody, Sutanuka, who is a Devadasi, and she is extremely, she's a person who another individual by name of Devadina admires. Devadina calls himself a Rupadhyaksha. He's probably one of the scribes at that point in time. And he writes that in this cave, this particular cave, Devadasi Sutanuka rested. That's one of the explanations given. This is a graffiti, friends, which will remind you of the kind of graffiti we get even today. You go to any heritage site and you'll find it on the wall, so and so like so and so. It's almost on that line, and to think of it that this is something that happened so many years back too, it gives us a peep into emotional ideas of the day. But there is another explanation given by scholars that maybe a reference to Devadina recording that Devadasi Sutanuka rested in this particular cave. But either ways, it is something which is very private, a private idea that was inscribed, which is not something official at all about it. The next inscription that I'm showing you here, it's inscription about, this is called an Ayagapatta. Ayagapatta was slabs of stones. This has been sourced from Kankali Tila, Mathura. This is a very interesting inscription which also has a kind of a design, a panel sculptural design, and then something written where we get a sense of someone who came from a courtesan class actually made a donation in the Kankali stupa. So that's an interesting part. Again, a private inscription, nothing to do with the state here. The next picture is a headless statue of Jain Saraswati at Kankali Tila, Mathura again, and we can call it a Pratima Lake inscription. I picked it up especially because it gives us an idea, of course, of a Pratima Lake. Pratima Lake is anything that is written on the statue or under the statue, and it does tell us about this Pratima or the statue of Saraswati, who happens to be an important deity in the Jain tradition. But more important, if you look at the hands closely, she is holding a pustak. Pustak is again something that is referred to a literate society. So precisely what we are discussing right now. Epigraphs deal with a literate society, and here we have a particular picture giving us an idea or of reiteration of that. The last of the pictures that I want to show you in this particular section is a base Nagar pillar inscription of Heliodorus that goes back to the 2nd century BCE. This is at Vidisha in Madhya Pradesh. Heliodorus was an Indo-Greek ambassador who donated this particular pillar. It is called a Garud pillar to the king in Madhya Pradesh. This pillar is important. It's a votive inscription because it gives us an idea of evolution of Bhagavatism, which is associated with Vaishnavism in the postmodern time, starting from the 2nd century BCE. So if we were to assess what the private inscriptions tell us, we understand they give us an idea into humanish emotions. Sometimes they also let us know about the participation of women donors in the Ayagapat. These are religious activities, and many a times these came from the class of courtesans. Finally, we also get to know about distinct religious traditions that were in existence at this point in time, evolving. Mathura was one place where so many of such inscriptions are found, whether they came from Buddhism, Brahmanism, or Jainism. Now coming to the next section, and that is the official inscriptions. The picture that I'm showing you here has got nothing to do with India. In fact, it's an official inscription which is called Hammurabi's Code from ancient Mesopotamia, ascribable to 1750 BCE. Now, I picked up this picture especially to tell you and give you an idea that in Mesopotamia around this time, an entire legal system was put on stone. It was inscribed there. It gives us an idea the role the state played in the lives of the people, because many of these verses within it deal with the position of women, with the market activities, with the training activities, and we also get to know that yes, it was a fairly literate society, but it is clearly an official inscription with the seal of the king at the bottom. Coming to the Indian side, again, the earliest inscriptions that we talk about, amongst them, this is a picture of Rumande pillar inscription of Ashok. And this is at Lumbini, which was the birthplace of Mahatma Buddha. Ashok was on a yatra there, and he got this pillar put in there and engraved, and where he actually exempted people from taxation because this was done in honor of Mahatma Buddha. The other inscription that we can see, closer inscription, this is the Minor Rock Edict here. This is in Srinivaspuri in Delhi. This is an inscription that gives us an idea of the formative years of the ruler as a Buddhist, and we can get a sense of his moving towards his policy of Dhamma. If we were to look at Ashokan inscriptions, friends, if we look at these inscriptions, we can actually divide them in various kinds. But most of these inscriptions are instructive inscriptions. These are told by these inscriptions are in the manner of a king talking to his people. We can easily sense that these are inscriptions that tell us about the way in which the king would actually engage with his populace. Friends, this is a very, very interesting topic. So far, we have looked at the types of inscriptions and when epigraphy emerged as a discipline, and our epigraphists who have helped us understand this tradition better. I'll end it right now and pick up threads again on the Mauryan and the modern inscriptions in the next section. Thank you.